Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Legal Bytes Newscast. My name's Alyte, I'm a lawyer, and this channel's all about explaining the law one bite at a time. First off, I apologize for getting this one out so late, and for the fact that we don't have any deep dive videos for you this week. We just moved literally halfway across the world, and we're dealing with about 9 hours of jet lag while we're under quarantine, so hopefully by next week we'll be back up and running fully, so we can get back to bringing you more great content. So on that note, if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can see what we have in store. For now though, let's talk about the presidential election in Georgia. The Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, ordered an audit of the general election votes in Georgia last week. The results of the audit came out on Thursday of this week, affirming a Biden victory in the state. Note that this was an audit, which is different from a recount. News outlets all over the place are reporting their review as a recount, but that's not exactly accurate, so we're going to go through the basic difference between the two. In all likelihood, a recount will probably actually happen in Georgia, so knowing the difference can at least help prevent some confusion and maybe some pending outrage that's likely to happen as a result. So anyway, to fully understand the difference between the two, we'll first back up for a minute to explain the context. As many people know, in the United States, each state is given broad authority to manage its own elections, including federal elections. That said, there are some generalities that are common to all states when it comes to the process of a federal election. They all start with the same election day, which is decided by Congress. Then, each state goes through a process called canvassing. During this process, they check for any irregularities in the collection or the counting of the votes, typically on a county-by-county basis. After each county completes the canvassing, it certifies. After every county has certified, then the state certifies the votes. At that point, there may be an opportunity for a recount, either mandatory or by request. Under Georgia law, there are post-election audits and there are recounts. Post-election audits happen during the canvassing phase, which, as I mentioned, ends with the certification of the vote, and recounts happen after certification. A post-election audit is usually a routine review of the ballots where paper ballots are compared to electronic records to make sure that they match up. The purpose of the audit is to make sure that the various systems involved in collecting and counting the votes are working. There are actually two types: traditional and risk limiting. Traditional audits look at a fixed percentage of voting districts or voting machines. No matter the margin between the two candidates, they analyze the same percentage. 34 states in the District of Columbia conduct traditional audits. Risk limiting audits, on the other hand, uses a set of statistical principles and methods, and the number of ballots that are audited during that audit depends on how tight the margin is and how many discrepancies are found in early sampling. For example, if it's a super tight margin, more ballots are audited. Now in Georgia, they have a pilot risk limiting audit program, meaning that it's pretty much brand new. Per statute, the Georgia Secretary of State is required to run the pilot risk limiting audit by December 21st, 2021. Reportedly, he decided to run this election because of the national significance and the closeness of the race. Going into the audit, the expectation was that the vote tallies would be slightly different, but wouldn't change the overall outcome of the election as it relates to Georgia. This is because hand counts are apparently considered more likely to have errors, since humans tend to make more mistakes than machines do. So when you're trying to match up the two, you're likely to find some discrepancies. So on Thursday, the results of the audit came out, and despite a narrowing of the margin from around 14,000 votes to around 12,000 votes, the results of the general election were affirmed. And a lot of emotion has resulted from both sides of the aisle, fanfare from the left, and outrage from the right. However, it is important to know that this wasn't exactly a recount, even though it did involve a tabulation of paper votes. Remember, an audit is where they look at a certain number of paper ballots and compare them to the electronic records to make sure that the systems work. A recount, on the other hand, is where they take every paper ballot and rescan it from the beginning. You can have an audit and a recount happen in the same election, and to be honest, that's most likely what's going to happen here. Although in Georgia there's no statutory trigger for an automatic recount, it does permit a recount to be requested by a number of people. First, election officials, including the Secretary of State, can request it if there's some sort of error or discrepancy in the returns. Previously, Secretary of State Raffensperger said that there would be a recount due to the closeness of the election, but given the results of the audit, it doesn't appear that there are enough errors or discrepancies in the returns to allow him to request a recount. Aside from that, a recount can also be requested by a candidate if the margin between the winning and losing candidates is less than or equal to 0.5% of the overall vote in the state. Because Trump trails Biden by about 0.28%, he falls within the acceptable range to request a recount in the state. And based on a lot of the grumblings that have been coming out of the Trump campaign, it sounds like they almost definitely will be requesting one. And also, one more important thing to note: there's no statutory time limit on a candidate requested recount, which means, like it or not, this could last a long time. Okay, so that's all we have for today. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. It really does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And as I mentioned before, if you enjoyed this video and you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel so you can find out when we upload more content like this one. Thanks!